Hello everyone, welcome to the dollhouse. I have finally moved into an apartment. It's a long story, but if you're willing to listen, I'm ready to spill the tea. Believe it or not, it took me nearly 7 months of continuous searching just to find a one-bedroom rental. We originally had a place to live here secured before we moved here, but that did not last for very long. The story goes like this. Last year, my fiance and I moved to Kimberley, BC. We were invited to live with his family members after they had heard that he had lost his job, and they told him that he should move in with them so he could have the time it would take to go to school and pick a new career without having to worry about bills. It sounded too good to be true. I was very apprehensive about this move because my brain tends to think along the lines of worst case scenarios, so I was worried that if things went badly there, or if we started to not get along with his grandparents, we would very quickly feel trapped and isolated, and these fears of mine became reality. In the short time we were living there, my in-laws started to treat us like we were children who had no autonomy. We were too far away from anything to walk, and there were no buses or other forms of public transit out there. The nearest business that was open to the public was an auto body repair shop that was over 20 kilometers away from the house. Besides that, we were surrounded by houses, mountains, and wilderness. We were told what to do, we were told when to wake up, we were told when we could eat, and we were scolded for taking breaks after doing physically intense chores for hours. The entire experience felt like prison. We couldn't leave without assistance, and we had no ability to make choices for ourselves. We were even given a curfew eventually, and we were told not to go out for walks at night, because they said to us that the sound of footsteps and the door closing was too loud at nighttime. We were basically forced to go to bed at 10 p.m. because any disturbances or sound would instantly wake them up. We even tried playing video games with no volume in the basement, but that got boring after a while, so we would just go to bed. If we complained about any of this, our mental health would be called into question. My fiance and I tried to look for work while we were there and schedule job interviews, but because we didn't have our own car, we relied on them to get us to these things. They didn't want us to leave or be unavailable to help them, so they would make excuses for why they couldn't be available to drive us, despite the fact that we were living with them. We offered to pay for gas and general vehicle expenses, but that wasn't enough. We were even told at one point that we must buy a car for them if we wanted to be driven to places they weren't already going to, and this included going to places like the doctor's office. Everything we needed was inconvenient or impossible. But at the same time, they were more than happy to put us to work at the house or volunteer us to help their friends with chores, all for free. Cleaning, pet sitting, watering other people's gardens, repairing bikes, you name it. If these people decided to give us a gift or pay us to say thank you, they would take it. In fact, before we had even finished moving into their house, we were sent to help the neighbor clean up his basement, and we were told afterwards that we were volunteered to help before we had even left Edmonton, and nobody asked us first. At one point, after I started working for the neighbor, which I'm going to get more into a little later in this video, they demanded that my fiance should start working too, but their version of what that meant was that he needed to be ready to do whatever he was told starting at 7 a.m. every day. We very quickly discovered that the reason why we were there was so we could be used as free labor. My fiance's grandfather had a massive to-do list, and there were a lot of things that had been pushed aside as projects for later. We completed the projects he was supposed to finish, and did even more than what was on that list in record timing, but that meant nothing to either of my in-laws because they felt as if all of that hard work was deserved because of the fact that they were giving us free room and board. After a while, I got tired of being the in-house cook, gardener, and maid, so, like I briefly mentioned earlier in this video, I started working for a neighbor that was willing to pay me by the hour. That made my in-laws mad. I volunteered to pay rent, but they refused the money. They told me I needed to talk to my boss to let her know I needed to be home from work early enough so that I could have time to make everyone dinner at 5:30 p.m. every night, and I was also expected to go home on my lunch breaks at work to make lunch for everybody. That left my fiance with even more chores to do, because when I left for work every day at 9 a.m., my in-laws still expected other people to take care of their responsibilities in the home, so my fiance was quite literally worked half to death. He lost 40 pounds in the time we were living with them, and he was already very thin. I was so upset about it that I didn't want to see him with his shirt off because it made me feel bad about the fact that he wasn't eating enough. I always gave him the biggest portion of food or tiptoed to the pantry to get him snacks in the middle of the night at the risk of being caught and scolded by his grandparents, but it still wasn't enough food for him. He was still only eating maybe 1,400 calories per day, even with my extra efforts to sneak him food. He also ran out of his inhaler prescription, and they refused to take him to the doctor to get a refill. One night, he had an asthma attack while we were staying in their home, and he was on the floor, struggling to breathe, and his grandparents were annoyed that he didn't have an asthma attack at a more convenient time of day. When my fiance was discharged from the hospital with a new inhaler, on the entire drive home, his grandparents were reminding him of all of the work that he needed to do when they got back to the property. I still made dinner every night I was there, but I became resentful. I was polite, but I wasn't as friendly as I used to be towards my in-laws. They had no clue I was unhappy though, because of how patient and friendly I tried to be, and every night after dinner, I still did chores and looked after the garden. I tried to keep the peace, but they didn't want harmony. They wanted full control over me and my fiance. After a while, I felt exhausted. I was working full time, and at the time, I was still doing a lot of physical labor on the property. So I feel like every single day that I was living there, I was working for 10 to 12 hours a day instead of just 8 hours a day. I restored 3 acres worth of land in 2 months. I spent countless hours mowing, raking, scything, weed whacking, pulling dandelions and thistles out by hand, turning soil with a shovel, taking big rocks out of the soil, straightening the fences, pruning and planting trees, sewing fabric sleeves for trees to prevent pests, repairing and deconstructing raised garden beds, landscaping around the house, making compost, chipping wood to use as mulch, putting down shade cloth I found in a shed, tending to crops, watering trees and plants, applying pesticides, and doing research. Blah, 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 blah. The list goes on and on and on. I was so thoughtful. I even bought decorations for the garden and went on hikes for the sake of locating and transplanting wild herbs into the garden. After clearing away the 2-foot tall grass and massive patches of the biggest weeds I've ever seen, finally, clovers took their place, and so did more wildflowers. When I could finally see what the area I cleared actually looked like underneath all of that foliage, I discovered that an old tree with dead branches was actually a plum tree that needed a lot of TLC, and in weeks, under my guidance, it was blooming and the rest of the garden was planted and fertilized. I planted peas, carrots, dill, tomatoes, potatoes, 4 varieties of lettuce, 2 varieties of kale, squash, and onions. I didn't choose what was planted in the garden. That part was decided by my in-laws because they didn't think I deserved a say in the matter. After all of that effort, the only thing they could think of to tell me was that I used too much gas for the lawnmower and the weed whacker, and that I should try to do more work by hand. I obliged, and it was brutal. Scything is backbreaking, monotonous work. However, I did not reap the rewards of my labor. I was given a stale piece of plum cake and was told it was the last of all of the plums from that tree. My in-laws had made the cakes and gave one to every neighbor so the plums wouldn't go to waste, because apparently there was so much produce that they didn't know what to do with all of it. All of the fruits and vegetables were gone, and they intentionally harvested them before we got back from the camping trip. I returned to bare dirt in the garden and some dandelions and other weeds that had started sprouting up. It made me so angry at the time, because it was one of the only times they had even stepped foot in the garden, and it was to spite me and to take credit for my hard work. The next spring, I noticed that the garden had been taken over by dandelions and tall grasses again, and my efforts were erased by the neglect that followed my absence. It wasn't just the garden, though. It was everything else I did that was also taken for granted. I helped them gather up necessary documents for filing their taxes properly, and I helped do their bookkeeping and kept financial records organized for them. I didn't just cook, I was responsible for planning grocery trips, budgeting, and for entertaining guests. I also did research that benefited their business, like sourcing cheaper materials and equipment. I did not just clean the house, I straight up reorganized the whole house from top to bottom, went through everything, and asked if we needed it or not. In fact, the 3rd day I was there consisted of me throwing away every single expired grocery item in the house, and there was a whole cold cellar in the basement to sort through, a pantry, and 2 chest freezers worth of expired food to throw away. A lot of it was not safe to eat because it was not stored properly and expired in 2016, but they still fought with me about the fact that it was good to eat and tried to convince me that I was being wasteful because I wanted to throw away expired food. On top of all of this, I was also saddled with the burden of being the person my in-laws would come to with all of their first world problems, and I was also used as a counselor. My emotions were secondary to theirs, and if they were sad, I was expected to drop everything to console them or talk to them for hours about their interests or concerns for the future and the environment. When my fiancé and I became unhappy about anything we deemed worthy of a discussion with them, there was never a proper resolution. It was always minimized, or our dissatisfaction towards them was flipped around on us and was used as an opportunity to call us ungrateful, or we would be lectured. We were not given voices in that situation, and what we thought about how things were going at the house did not matter. To make things worse, if they felt we were slipping up or not doing a satisfactory job of caring for them and their house, my in-laws would tell other people in the community that we were ungrateful, messy people that lacked respect for the house we were staying in, or they would plant seeds of doubt in my fiancé's head, and they would tell him a lie about made-up conversations I apparently had with my in-laws where I expressed wanting to end our relationship as a couple. They also lied to him about being able to afford sending him to college, and part of the reason why we put up with their behavior for so long was because we thought my fiancé would finally be able to get education. I had access to their financial records though, so I looked through some paperwork and realized that his grandparents were in debt to the tune of $250,000. This was a shock to me, and I immediately told my fiancé about their financial situation, and we both realized that they couldn't afford to send him to school because they couldn't even afford to live in that house. When he confronted them about everything, that's when tensions boiled over, because they tried to gaslight my fiancé into thinking he was mentally unstable and irrationally angry about how we were being treated by them, and they denied that they were lying to him about being able to afford to send him to school. They did, however, offer to send him to school to become an airplane maintenance technician, but that was because they needed to fix and sell their airplane to pay off their debt. My fiancé refused and respectfully asked if we could simply have weekends off if he wasn't going to be going to school, because we were being overworked, and that request was denied. After that argument, my fiancé and I decided to go camping nearby so we could let things cool off at the house, but apparently that was the last straw for them, because when we left to go camping, they took it as the ultimate sign of disrespect. My in-laws saw it as us rebelling against them and taking an unauthorized vacation from our jobs under their roof. We were camping so close by that I was still able to stop in to help with chores around the house and go to work, but that was too much for them to handle. When we got back from our camping trip, they told us that we needed to move out as soon as possible because things weren't working out anymore. Awkwardly enough, they were more than happy to move us into the neighbor's house to get rid of us, but we did not want to impose on these people, and instead of taking advantage of their kindness, we decided that we would move in on the condition that we would be trying to find a different place to live as soon as possible. Unfortunately, I ended up staying with the neighbors for almost 6 months, and that is not what I intended. I never wanted to be a burden to anybody, but that's what ended up happening because they just wanted us to leave and things became extremely uncomfortable. Awkwardly enough, they were more than a little enthusiastic about driving us to the viewings. But now that we are here, they're not helping us finish the move. We moved in over a week ago, and I had to ask the same neighbor I was living with to drive me back up the road to get the rest of my stuff from their house because apparently they're too busy to help us finish moving out. I've moved on from everything I have described today, and I'm doing much better now, but I wanted to tell you guys what has been happening in my life, because it has been a lot for me to digest, and I feel like if I share what's been going on with you guys, it will be a lot easier to understand why I was gone from the channel for so long. But despite all of that negativity, I couldn't be happier because in my Bratz Goals video, I mentioned wanting to move into a place where I had enough room to properly display my dolls, and I've finally done it. To celebrate my move, I have decided to show all of you around the Platzl, which is the main business district of Kimberly. Also, fun fact, there is a Canada Post location a short distance from the Platzl that I use to ship out Bratz dolls, but it won't be featured in today's video. Now that I've said all of that, I'm going to move out of the frame a bit so you can see what the Platzel looks like. Unfortunately, even though I've moved into a new place, you won't be seeing the majority of my dolls displayed anytime soon because I still don't have shelves to display my dolls on. The problem is, I have wall shelves, but landlords in this area are, understandably so, not big fans of drywall screws because they leave large holes in the wall. But I'm not a big fan of command strips or other adhesive brands, so wall shelves are not an option for me right now because I can't hang them up properly. The compromise would be me buying a different type of shelving instead, and I'm fine with that because the last thing I need in my life right now is more obstacles that could jeopardize my ability to find a place to live. And in a town like this, you need to be on good terms with who you rent from. I also don't want to become another reason why someone chooses to rent their place out as an Airbnb suite in this area, because housing up here is scarce, and I've noticed that a lot of people in this community have turned their backs on long-term tenants or people that are not just in this area to ski or mountain bike. But even though a bookshelf is always an option for me, I haven't really found a bookshelf I like yet, even when I've been browsing through used furniture for sale in this area, and if I do find something I like, it's usually beyond my current budget. Anyways, until I get shelving, I won't be able to film a lot of the other videos I plan on sharing with you guys. The most important of the videos, obviously, would be the planned collection tour video sometime in the future. But once I get a bookshelf, I will film myself setting everything up. Until then, however, you're going to see a lot of highly edited videos like this, but if you're interested, you should stay tuned for more candid footage, because I promise it's coming. Thank you for listening to me today. If you're new here, thank you for subscribing. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for your viewership. I appreciate each and every one of you, and the time you have taken to watch today's video means a lot to me because it's hard for me to find people who are interested in Bratz where I live, so the online part of this community is very important to me too, because it allows me to connect with viewers just like you. I know that I do a lot of talking, but I want to hear what you guys have to say. If you ever want to talk about anything Bratz related, or you just want to talk about life, please leave a comment on my videos or reach out to me through my social media pages. I sincerely hope this isn't the last time I have the pleasure of talking to you through my videos, but until next time, wherever you are in the world, I hope you have a good morning, afternoon, or night, and remember, you are always welcome back at the dollhouse.